Okay. Okay, welcome back to the Black Mind Garden. Now, you guys know that we were formerly Remap Your Mind, and we just went through a little rebrand. And that is because, I have created this podcast to have conversations about what we experience as Black and Brown people and the things that we don't often talk about.
Mhm.
So, you've heard about it. We are now the Black Mind Garden, and we're still remapping minds so that you can create a life you design. So I'm excited because we have a repeat today. We have a repeat. Dr. Kelly Jackson King, if you remember a few weeks ago, we started this conversation of talking about generational wealth
Yes.
and ways, the mindset around generational wealth and some of the ways that and things that we need to be doing to prepare. And in the conversation, we knew that there was going to be a part two. And what we want to continue that conversation today, but
Yes.
we want to start to get into how do you have these conversations, especially about final wishes with your loved ones. So I just want to welcome you back, Dr. Kelly. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you so much. It is really great to be back. And I'm glad that we're doing this because a part of the whole concept is starting the conversation. It doesn't often start and end all on the same day. It's just about us getting comfortable with having these types of conversations. So it's actually perfect that there was a part two because it shouldn't be that we think it is one and done.
Yeah.
We figured it all out. Many
Yeah.
of these things you're figuring out things as you go along, so the
Mhm.
conversation continues. But the starting of it is sometimes what can be a challenge for people. The great thing is
Absolutely.
that what I have found is when I started having the conversation with my
Mhm.
husband, it became so much easier. It was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, what seemed so formidable actually got easier and easier and easier to the point where it's actually now very comfortable.
Yeah, yeah. And it's good to know, like, just, and I'm sure for our listeners to hear that, we know that in the beginning that conversation can be a challenging conversation to have, but once you actually start the conversation, then it becomes a little bit easier to continue the conversation
Yes.
because you begin to understand that having the conversation doesn't mean that one is, like we talked about, one is planning for,
Yeah.
the death, you know but death and final wishes can be such a hard thing for people to face, right? We there's something that feels final about it, and so people don't want to think about their loved ones dying. People don't want to think about
Absolutely.
losing these people. But when we reframe it to not thinking necessarily about, okay, we're planning for your death, but we're discussing what we want, like how do we set us up for
Yes.
success when we transition, so that
Absolutely.
it's not difficult for the people who are still living, who have to make the arrangements and all
The
of that, right?
decisions.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I like to, I believe, I'm sure you do too. Words are so powerful, and
Hmm.
the words that we use can influence so much about what we do. So I
Hmm.
am always trying to reframe the conversation from a conversation about death and dying, which I don't believe that this is what the conversation is about. It's about love and leaving a legacy. So if we can
Yes.
change the way we think about it, all of a sudden it becomes
Hmm.
actually a positive conversation. I am
Yeah.
talking about love and leaving a legacy. I am not
Hmm.
planning for my death. I'm planning for love
Yeah.
and leaving a legacy. So it really
I
just
love that.
changes how I think about the whole conversation. Because in my
Hmm.
own personal journey, as much as I loved my husband, we did not have the conversation when it was just the two of us. I'm going to be honest.
Right.
We started it, we peeked our
Hmm.
toe into it because it was something that
Hmm.
came up at work. And
Hmm.
we said, okay, should we talk about it? And we both chickened out. So I'm not saying it from this place of, oh, I was born being comfortable with the conversation. So I
Right.
feel the people in the audience, right? Like I wasn't born
Yeah.
comfortable with the conversation, but A turning
Yeah.
point for me was when and I may have mentioned it the first time, was when I had my son. I was pregnant with him. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
it's time to have this conversation. I'm an
Mm-hmm.
OBGYN. I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
planning for anything to happen. I waited a long time to have my two beautiful children. So I wasn't planning to go
Mm-hmm.
anywhere. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, if I was going to have them, just being responsible in my love for them, I wanted to have a little
Mm-hmm.
plan in place
Yeah.
for if something should happen. And the
Yeah.
biggest thing for me was, it was not about the money. So many people think about the money, but remember, it was the catalyst was my children. So the catalyst was the
Mm-hmm.
love part of it.
Yes.
And I just was like,
Absolutely.
there is no way I want there to be 10 minutes when they're in the hands of either the state, the government, or someone
Mm-hmm.
making a decision that I just would not have chosen. And even if they made
Yeah.
the right decision ultimately, I didn't want that gray zone of time
Yeah.
until even maybe the right decision was made. So that
Right.
was truly the catalyst. It was not a money catalyst. It was a love catalyst in caring for
Mm-hmm.
the person or people who were maybe not going to be of age to be able to care
Mm-hmm.
for themselves.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I love the way you reframe that, like love and leaving a legacy. And just to backtrack, you've been on before, but I do want, for those who are new to the podcast, for you to reintroduce yourself and kind of give a little bit of, a background of what you do now.
Absolutely. I kind of say I have multiple hats. So just to
Yeah.
give a basic background, I am a mom, obviously, because I just spoke about that. I'm a wife. I'm an OBGYN. I work as a hospitalist now, and I am an entrepreneur, which is kind of part of the conversation that we're
Yeah.
having now. And I also do real estate investments. So I say I am multi-passionate. I'm someone
Yes.
who started off in my career as an OBGYN, knowing I wanted to be an OBGYN
Yeah.
from very, very young. It was really,
Hmm.
I wasn't one of those people who went from being a fireman to a this, to a that, to a this, which is nothing wrong with that. I knew what I wanted. I
Yeah.
went ahead and did that.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because we all have journeys. And along that journey, I am equally as passionate about what I do in medicine. But along that
Hmm.
journey, I had read some books about, ironically, wealth and finances, and realized that I had all of my wealth and finances in um, the cash flow quadrant that was only employeeship. And I wanted to
Yeah.
move into being an entrepreneur and an investor, but I needed to
Hmm.
find something that actually worked alongside my career in the beginning.
Hmm.
And so I work as an entrepreneur with people like we're kind of talking about, who are interested in not just pre-planning, but they're interested, they think a little bit differently. They think that, you know what, I want to be empowered. I want to protect my family. I want to have access to justice. And this particular conversation is a part of that.
Hmm.
So those are the
Hmm.
people that I work with, families,
Yeah.
individuals, and even small business owners who
Hmm.
are looking to protect and empower their business. So
Hmm.
that's what I do. That's what
Hmm.
I do from my entrepreneur hat. So
I love
multi-passionate,
it.
yes.
And it's important, I think even with you having those multiple hats and having the entrepreneurial side, that, planning becomes even more important
Yeah.
because there are, multiple facets that need to be dealt with. And so when you're planning, you have a plan for all of those things
Yes.
as a legacy, as
Hmm.
passing a legacy on
Yes.
to whoever is still here on the earth, right? In physical
Absolutely.
form. And so, I'd like to really kind of jump in because um, I'm sure people want to know, like, well, okay, how do you start that conversation? What is the conversation, that you have? And I really love how you said, love and legacy. So I'm curious to see, how is it that, one would start the conversation with their kids or with their spouse or with their sisters or brother or mom, and is it different for each one? Like, what, tell me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I believe it's important first to think yourself what you would want,
Mhm.
right? So even before the
Mhm.
conversation starts with other people, just take a
Mhm.
moment. It doesn't have to be a week-long thing. Just kind of think to
Mhm.
yourself, what would you want? Who are the people that are important to you?
Mhm.
And who are and maybe what you have, right? So
Mhm.
again, doesn't have to be big, but just a few moments to kind of process that, right? Or even
Yeah.
processing, something that's difficult when people pass away is the question about burial and cremation. Like
Mhm.
that's a big
Mhm.
issue for many people. People feel very strongly, either themselves personally or their family members. And this
Mhm.
is where the discord can happen in families, right?
Mhm.
One person is
Yeah.
extremely against cremation, they have very strong
Mhm.
beliefs about it. Another
Mhm.
person does not believe that way. And then again, that's why we need to have these conversations so we're not leaving it to our family to get into
Yeah.
disarray at that time.
Mhm.
So maybe even starting
Mhm.
a little bit with yourself. And then it
Right.
really should go to probably a key person, right?
Mhm.
Particularly if you're in
Mhm.
a relationship, that person typically being in the spouse. But if you're not in a relationship with a spouse, it definitely needs to be with anyone that would be considered a major beneficiary, because they should know
Mhm.
where things are and where to
Mhm.
go. Um,
Right.
some people have a direct approach with having the conversation with their significant person, whether it be a spouse or a significant person, parents, sibling,
Mhm.
and so forth.
Mhm.
And they kind of know that person and know, hey, I just want to have this conversation. This is important to me. I want to share with
Yeah.
you what's important to me. And that's kind of a direct approach. Nothing wrong with
Mhm.
that. But there may be
Mhm.
people, again, where this conversation is very difficult for them. They don't even want to
Yeah.
think about losing you or
Yeah.
them, even, right? Because we need to have a conversation with people that we love about what they would want.
That's right.
So it's a mutual conversation. And for those people, we sometimes recommend approaching in a very neutral way. Might be having a conversation about something you've seen on TV, or,
Mhm.
Chadwick Boseman, passing away,
Yeah.
and what
Yeah.
I wonder what kind of legacy he left for his family,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
just starting the conversation where we're exploring it, right? So famous
Easing
people and
into
what's
it.
happened to them is a great way
Yeah.
to start a conversation. And then, by the
Mhm.
way, I know if that happened to me, what I would want is, right? So we've
Mhm.
kind of
Mm.
started it in a way that we neutralized it,
Mhm.
and now we're now in conversation. So either a direct approach, or this happened to this person, this is what I would want, and what would you
Right.
want? Right now so again, that's why I said it may not be a one-time conversation. It may
Mhm.
need to
Mhm.
develop over time. So those are some
Yeah.
techniques: a direct approach, starting with you, a direct approach
Mhm.
versus saying, this is important to me, I'd like to set a time aside to talk about it. Or an
Mhm.
indirect approach, meaning I need to start the conversation in a way that people are feeling comfortable. And I
Yeah.
think we may have mentioned before, it's always best to have this conversation in a neutral time.
Right.
It's the most ideal is a neutral time, meaning that, not when you want to have the conversation, preferably before anyone is ill. That is really the best
Mhm.
time to have the conversation,
Mhm.
because then it becomes
Mhm.
less about you're trying to wish something bad upon yourself or me, right? Think
Right.
about that
Right.
conversation
Exactly.
when someone is ill.
That's right.
We don't, preferably, my heart says to everyone, try to have the conversation when everyone is healthy, so that
Mhm.
it's not a conversation about death and dying. It really is a conversation about love and legacy.
Yeah. I like that. I really love that. So one of the things that um I've had conversations that people struggle with is how do you choose? When you have multiple family members, especially for people who either are not married, like
Yes.
myself, don't have a spouse and have a child, like so single parents,
Yeah.
um, how do you choose who that person is? What are the criteria that you might want that people might want to think about as they're thinking about this legacy and what they want for themselves?
Absolutely.
if they were to be, from a decision-making standpoint, if something were to happen, and after death, from a burial and will and all that. How do you think about how to choose people?
Yeah. So I'm going to start with the technical side of things, like what you need to have in the
Hmm.
document. And then, of course, the emotional side of it or the decision making side of it is going to be so, so different. And so I'll share a little bit about the decision making process from my husband and I. Even if someone is married or has a significant other, the documents need to have at least two other people. So we all have to think about that. Okay.
Hmm.
So you were mentioning if you're single. Well, it's almost in some ways similar if you are married because you still
Mm.
have your executor or your personal
Right.
representative, and if you're married,
Hmm.
well, that person tends to be your husband or spouse first, right?
Hmm.
But the
Right. Hmm.
recommendation is still to have two additional other people.
Hmm.
So we all have to think about the person outside of the immediate person anyway. So single people are not
Right.
alone with having to make that decision.
Good
Okay.
to know.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's good to know you're not alone with having to make that decision. When it comes to those of us like you and I who have children under the age of 18, the second, or actually, in my opinion, the most important thing is the raising of the child, right? And so,
Hmm.
again, if you're in a relationship, there's some laws. If you have of your, obviously there's some laws related to the father or mother of the child. Okay, so you need to speak to an
Right.
attorney
Right.
about that. You sometimes cannot bypass that person. That's why you need to
Yeah.
get some advice about that. But just let's
Hmm.
say for example, that other person is not there, they're not available, whatever. You still
Hmm.
need to have two other people, or it's recommended two other people, right? So we
Hmm.
all have
Hmm.
to make that decision about
Hmm.
that. So there needs to be both a guardian and a trustee. So when you have underage
Hmm.
children, the guardian is the person who actually would physically raise your child until they're of age. And the
Hmm.
trustee is the person who would manage the finances until
Hmm.
your child is of age. For the
Right.
great majority of people, probably over 90% of the time, it's going to be one and the same person. One and the same
Okay.
person. So typically, the
Yeah.
person you're choosing as the guardian is also going to be the one helping to manage anything you may be leaving behind for that child. So it's a
Hmm.
critically important question, right? I would say, certainly, when I looked at choosing the guardian, I wanted someone who would be most like me in raising my child. Most like me. But
Hmm.
there is no one who's going to be exactly like you. It's
Right.
impossible, right? Because you're
Right.
unique. And so you
Hmm.
have to use your best judgment, in my opinion, about who is going to maybe instill the values that most closely align with you, who
Hmm.
is capable, who um I mean, I hate to even put finances in here, but
Yeah.
quite frankly, there has to be some financial wherewithal for them to raise
Hmm.
another child,
Yep.
right? So all
Hmm.
of that. And I know at the time when when we first did our first version, when my children were very, very young, even though my parents were both living, they were a little bit older when they had me, and I was a little
Hmm.
older. So I knew in my heart, even though that they would be the people that I would think would be the most like, because they raised me, right? But I
Hmm.
also knew that medically, that probably wasn't going to work, right?
Right.
So
Hmm.
again, it may not be making that decision is hard because no one can ever
Yeah.
replace us. But I think those are the
Hmm.
things you need to think about. Who are going to instill
Yeah.
the values that are most closer to you, who can physically, emotionally, and financially do the best that they can in it. Not everything may line up. And if you have
Hmm.
questions where maybe you think this is the person to love up on my child or children, but maybe they're not the greatest with finances, or maybe I want to separate the two out, it is okay to have a guardian and a trustee. And that might work for
Hmm.
people where they say, I don't know if I want them to have access to everything if there's 10 years that they may be, in
Yeah,
charge of the finances, that might also help people to relieve them. I want this person to be the person who raises them and this person to be
mhm,
the trustee, so that there's a
mhm.
little bit of checks and balances if you so choose
Yeah,
to do that. So that's some options.
absolutely. Yeah, I like that, and one of the things I'll add to that is, that if I love how you say the person who'll instill the values, and I think it would be a person who knows you well,
Yes,
because then they know your values, and you trust that they will honor, and they know your parenting style, and they'll trust that you trust that they'll honor that parenting style, they'll honor those values, and so I think there has to be a level of trust in that person as
oh,
well, because it could be, someone who you think might who knows your values, but then they may not necessarily honor those values, right? they
absolutely,
they may decide, well, I'm going to do things my way, right? And so
absolutely.
you have to think beyond, just sort of like who will love your kids. It's like who will raise them, like you said, who will raise them the most like you would.
Exactly.
And how I have things set up, how I have things set up is what the latter is I have, one person who would be the guardian, and then another person who would be the trustee, because the
Abs
person who I absolutely want to have my son, if me and my son's father were gone, she's still working on the finances thing. Now, if that were
yeah,
to change, then I would change it over, right? But I think it's, and I've heard some people say, even having an attorney, when you have enough um, wealth, an attorney
abs
that you absolutely trust to be an executor of the state as well. So I've heard that as well.
oh, absolutely. That is a very, very good point, Aisha, and I'm glad you brought it up because sometimes a trusted third party is a great choice, not for the guardian part of it, but in terms of the finances and holding
Hmm.
things in place until your children are a certain age. And so these are all
Hmm.
great options that give us control, right? So that we're not feeling
Hmm.
out of control with what happens, when we pass. I was going to say if, but the
Hmm.
reality is when, right?
We all will,
So
right?
all great choices. And that's why I do think it's important to be able to run certain things past an attorney, ask them
Hmm.
questions. I think it's extremely important in blended relationships or again with
Hmm.
single parents. You need to know what the law says about things and then what things you can
Hmm.
do to be proactive. There's
Right.
always a level of trust. You're 100% right
Hmm.
about that. There's always a level of
Hmm.
trust. So it's important to, when you're making these decisions, make sure you have some trust that the person will do what you wish,
Hmm.
including when you had mentioned before, related to even you, right? And so
Hmm.
many times as people are passing, there's a transition. And,
Hmm.
a part of that estate planning is not just when I have passed, but there's that living will component of it,
Yes.
that there's that
Yes.
healthcare power of attorney component of it,
Hmm.
and that
Hmm.
financial power of attorney component
Hmm.
of it. And so, you and I are in medicine, but not well, many of the people I know that you're connected with are in medicine, but the living will is a document where it's pretty basic, outlining what you would want to have done or not want to have done when it comes most specifically to life support. But that is
Hmm.
not enough. People think that that's enough. There's so many
Hmm.
decisions that physicians and families need to make that you may not be
Hmm.
able to pre-plan or know. And so there needs to be a person again who would most likely carry out your wishes, right?
Right.
Because
That would honor your
another
exactly.
area where people feel very strongly, you know, they feel strongly that it's not that they don't love you, but they may feel strongly about what should be done or shouldn't be done
Right.
at the time of
Right.
passing, a medical emergency. For an example, some people believe very strongly in not receiving blood. That is their thing. They
Mm-hmm.
would not receive it. And if they now have someone who believes very differently, well, now you have a conflict. So you do want to
Yeah.
have someone be in a position that if they are your healthcare power of attorney, that as much as
Hmm.
possible, they have the similar value systems that you do.
Hmm.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we want to live in an ideal world where we can step outside of ourselves and be in control of all of that. All we can do
Mhm.
is the best that we can to help things to be as smooth a transition as possible. I know when my
Yeah.
dad was terminally ill, it was important that I was his financial power of attorney because there were
Hmm.
still bills that needed to be paid while he was
Hmm.
terminally ill, you know, and
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
ran the risk of the home that my mother and he had worked hard for being lost in that transition if things weren't being
Hmm.
paid, right?
Right.
So that's why people sometimes need to think of these things so that grandma's not kicked out of the house, the family
Right.
home, because
Hmm.
things were not clearly outlined. And that has happened
Hmm.
so many times
Hmm.
where it wasn't clear, the person didn't know where the insurance policy was, and
Hmm.
things just get lost instead of
Hmm.
just outlining where things are.
That's right. That's right. I think that's so important. And even, for myself, when I thought about, choosing someone as a medical power of attorney, I thought about a person who not a person who doesn't love me or is not invested, but a person who can bypass that emotion to make the right decision, right? You
Yes.
know, luckily for me, I have a lot of medical people in my family, and so
Good.
we're used to doing that. So I have a cousin who, and so I think as we talked about before, there are multiple aspects you have to think about that multiple people can be involved in. And I
Absolutely.
think also what's important is that everybody knows who everybody is, right? Like, whoever's your medical power of attorney knows who the financial power of attorney, if they're not the same person. Whoever your medical power of attorney is also knows who beneficiaries are. If when the time of passing comes, like there's all of these. They need to all be able to be in communication. So you almost have like a legacy team.
Yes. That is
You have a
so,
legacy team.
yes.
you know?
Well, we said that it started with you thinking about what you
Hmm.
wanted, and then it would go, the conversation starting next with the person closest to you. But it
Hmm.
absolutely has to, at some point, even if it's in a small way, involve the people who you're designating, because you may
Hmm.
be surprised and find out that that person respectfully declines.
Yeah,
And it
absolutely.
would be important to know that before, right? Maybe they
Yes,
don't
ma'am.
feel prepared for that, or that's not a role that they
Mhm.
want to have. So again, it
Right.
doesn't have, it depends on the relationship and it depends on what it is. Doesn't have to be a big, long, drawn out conversation,
Mhm.
but hey, by the way, I'm interested in designating you as this person in this role.
Mhm.
Would you be okay with
Mhm.
that? And at the time of my passing, letting people know where things are, right? And so I
Mhm.
think we may have
Mhm.
mentioned that there was a long period of time where people thought Michael Jackson did not have a will. He did have one, but it was a period of time before they discovered it. By then, things are already in motion. And so it's
Yeah.
harder to go back in time. So, yes,
Mhm.
you and then the significant person or persons, but it should
Mhm.
involve the people who you're designating. And it also
Mhm.
depends on the age, but your beneficiaries should also be aware, right? Again, depending on the age. If
Mhm.
someone is, I'm not going to have that conversation with a 5-year-old,
Right.
but, as my kids are getting older, I want them
Mhm.
to be aware of, okay, if something happens, Auntie Kim,
Mhm.
Auntie Mikey, so they're
Mhm.
aware of what's going on.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
for my husband and I, our two main beneficiaries are our two children, but many people
Mhm.
have nieces and nephews that
Mhm.
are near and dear to them, right? And there's
Yeah.
nothing
Mhm.
wrong with that. Again, for those who may be single, for those who may not be parents, I
Mhm.
always believe we are all of equal value,
Mhm.
irregardless of who our family relationships may be. And it's equally
Mhm.
important for us to have these conversations, right? Not devalue
Mhm.
because, oh,
Mhm.
I don't have a child, or not at
Yeah.
all. You have people that you love and you want to, bless them, just
Mhm.
as well. It may be a parent, right? So you
Mhm.
may say, if something happens, I want certain things to go to even a parent, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
many different variations, but those beneficiaries, depending on age and relationship, should probably have some awareness of what's going on. And if
Absolutely.
you're afraid
Absolutely.
of
Now,
them knowing, they
mhm.
may not be, they may not need to be beneficiaries.
Yes, this is very true. Very true. So you got to listen to your intuition.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, this has been such an enlightening conversation. I think that we've touched on so many points, like how you choose your power of attorneys, how you choose like medical, and how you
Mhm.
choose your guardianship, and how you. It's like there's so many pearls that you dropped today, and how the question that came up as we were talking, and I wrote it down, and it's going to end up being the title of the show, you know, is who is your legacy team? Who is your legacy team? And I think it's important that people understand that everyone needs a legacy team. I think there may be some people that are like, well, I don't have that much, so I don't need to think
Mhm.
about that yet. I think it's important that no matter how much you perceive that you have,
Yes.
that you still create a legacy team, whether it involves an attorney or not, whether it involves your, parents or whoever it involves. Everyone needs to have that legacy team. It could be one person, it could be five people,
Absolutely.
because at the end of the day, we all want to leave that love and that legacy to the people who are left behind when we go. You know.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I think I may have mentioned it before. I like the term estate plan, but sometimes that term throws people off because they think of an estate as this huge lump of money, land,
Right.
real estate, and it
Mm-hmm.
almost um, they almost discount that they need to be a part of that conversation because that word sounds so big and grandiose. And I really
Mm-hmm.
tell people there's two components. You have someone that you love, and you have
Mm-hmm.
something that you leave behind. It does not have to
Yes.
be big and grand. It can
Right.
even be just things that are personal and near and dear to you or to your
Mm-hmm.
family. It can be just that.
Mm-hmm.
But a part of that legacy is, as you mentioned, even just the decisions that need to be made regarding you, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's why you said just what you said. Everybody needs to have that legacy team because a part of my goal is that if there's a point of transition, I don't want to put someone else in an uncomfortable position of having to make decisions that either they don't know are right for me or that
Mm-hmm.
maybe other people in the family are in disagreement about putting that
Right.
person in a difficult position. So,
Right.
the word estate throws people off because, again, it points people back to having a large sum of money. But remember, this plan may have nothing to do with money.
Right.
Right. So we talked
Right.
about that in that living will and the healthcare power of attorney and so forth, and the
Mm-hmm.
guardianship.
Yeah.
None of those things have to do with money. But my
Right.
whole thing is if you do have anything that you leave behind, why wouldn't we want to put it in the hands of the people that we love the most?
Absolutely.
I had a conversation with someone, and she had mentioned that she did not start off in life with anyone leaving her anything. And
Mm-hmm.
so she hadn't really thought about leaving anything for her children. Now she's in a better position than what her parents were.
Mm-hmm.
And a part of me thought to myself, well, there's only two choices. One, it gets lost and ends up in the wrong hands or back with the state,
Mm-hmm.
or it goes to the person you love. There
Right.
really is no in between. So even if you weren't granted or gifted anything, if you have something, we only have two choices. It's going to go where it's not supposed to go, or it's going to go to the person that we love. So why don't we at least make a plan to have it go to the person that we love?
Absolutely. 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 Wow. So I think on that note, um, we will just, have that, leave people with the question of how are you building your legacy team? Who are those people? Start with yourself, right? Start with yourself and what you want. Think about the people who know you the best, who you trust to honor your values, who you trust to raise, if you have children, to raise your children the closest to you, how you would raise
Mm-hmm.
them. Obviously, we can be replaced, right? Make sure you check with the laws,
Yes.
when you have other parents involved, co-parenting or blended families or
Yes.
single parenthood. And think about the people, especially when you're talking about living will, who will honor your wishes and carry
Yes.
them out, who you trust to do that. And the bottom line is that everyone needs a legacy team. Make sure they all know each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are some very, very salient points, very, very important points for people to hear. And we don't talk about it enough in our community. And we talked about at the beginning how to initiate that conversation, the direct approach versus the indirect approach, right? We talked about so much, Kelly.
Awesome.
So I really want to thank you, because I think these conversations, these last two conversations that we've had, have been so important. And I think you said it earlier when you said this is an ongoing conversation. It's not a one and done conversation.
Yes.
And so I encourage the listeners to, this is homework. Y'all know I love to give homework. To continue to think about this, to really begin to give this some thought over time, and to begin planning. And Dr. Kelly, I want you to tell people how they can get in touch with you if they might need some support in that arena.
Absolutely. Well, some of the best ways to reach out to me, of course, are on social media. So you
Mm-hmm.
can connect with me on Facebook. It's facebook.com/ask Dr. Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also on LinkedIn, and it's under just my
Mm-hmm.
regular name, Kelly Jackson King. There's a few of us, so make sure you're choosing the right one. And if you're on Linktree, or if you're familiar with Linktree, it's linktr.ee/ask Dr. Kelly. I do
Perfect.
host, at least on a monthly basis, how to have a conversation about finances and final wishes, as well as a
Mm-hmm.
will workshop, so people can start to put pen to paper. I do give
Mm-hmm.
out a free will questionnaire that people can start having this conversation and putting pen to
Mm-hmm.
paper. And so I'll certainly
Awesome.
make sure I reach back out to you, Dr. Maiysha, and let you know the next one that I'm having, so people can maybe
Yeah.
join now that they've
And
started
we'll,
thinking about it and it's
yes.
in their heads and mulling it
Yes.
over, so that we can kind of start that process of getting those things done, and even how to have access to speaking to an attorney when you have some questions about what you should
Yeah.
do or what the law says, before you even, think you finalized something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great, 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 great. And we'll make sure we have all these links in the show notes. So if you're wondering how to get in contact with Dr. Kelly, you can click the show notes. If you're watching by video, it's in the show notes are in the description, and you can reach out to her. And as soon as we get the dates for the next upcoming conversation, I'll make sure I put those in there as well.
Absolutely.
Yes. So thank you again so much for this conversation. I'm sure we can come up with more topics to talk about, because, we've delved into entrepreneurship. We've delved
Yes,
into multiple domains. So I just look forward to continuing these conversations.
I do
And
too.
yeah, so thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maiysha. I really appreciate it. And hopefully people will walk away again just comfortable and at peace that
Mhm,
this is something
mhm.
that's just a part of the process of us being grown
That's
up.
right.
We're grown ups, right?
We're grown ups. We I put our big girl and our big boy panties, well, big girl panties and big boy, what do you call those? Boxers.
Briefs.
Big boy
Okay,
boxers.
brief
Yes,
boxers.
big boy boxers and big girl panties on, and tackle these conversations head on. And that's what we're talking about, remapping our minds to from talking about death and dying to talking about leaving a legacy, love and leaving a legacy. So thank you once again. And of course, to our listeners, I always want to give a shout out to the listeners, because without the listeners, there is no podcast. if you like this podcast, if you like these conversations, I, invite you to share them because we do want this message to be spread to as many of the community as possible. It's such an important conversation. So share it with even just 3 people and leave a little review to let us know what you think of our conversations. And if you even have a request, let us know what that is. All right. So thank you so much for the conversation, and I look forward to the next time.
Thank you.
Oh, all right. We'll see you on the next episode, y'all. Namaste. One.